My name is Neil Carter, and what I'm about to tell you isn't easy to believe. I know, it sounds crazy, but everything that happened to me that night, well, I can still feel it in every corner of my mind. Make no mistake, this isn't just another story about shadows or noises in the dark. It's about something that changed everything. Something that changed me. If you're also the type who likes to delve into the unexplained and come away with more questions than answers, please, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Now, let's get started. And trust me, it's going to be hard to forget. I'll be blunt. If someone told me this story, I wouldn't believe them either. But I'm not here to convince anyone, just to tell you what happened to me that bloody night. It was 1 a.m. and I was driving home after another shift at the pub. You know how it is, bartenders don't have time to breathe, let alone live. I should have turned down the extra shift, but honestly, I needed the money. So there I was on the B6277. A road so deserted that civilization seems to have forgotten about it. The radio was on, but I didn't even pay attention to the music. Blues, I think. There was something comforting about the sound, even if it was just to keep the silence from driving me mad. Sleep was beginning to weigh on me, and I could feel my eyelids threatening to close. Then I saw it. On the roadside, a figure stood still. I got a bit confused, you know. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. All I know is that it was there, motionless like a shadow out of place. I stared for a few seconds before slowing down. I don't know why I did it, but curiosity overcame me. When I got closer, the thing turned its head in my direction. Man, I swear, my blood froze. It wasn't just someone standing in the cold. It wasn't normal. Its face was partially covered, perhaps by a hood, but its eyes, I don't even know if you can call them eyes. They were two black holes, empty, as if they were sucking in all the light around them. I didn't think twice. I pressed down on the accelerator and left it behind. My heart was racing, and I kept telling myself, it's just a drunk, someone's in, a costume. There's nothing wrong with that. But the truth was that I didn't believe my own words. The feeling of being watched grew. I adjusted the rearview mirror, expecting to see only the emptiness of the road behind me. But no, he was there, or her, or that, in the middle of the road, as still as before. No, it can't be, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck, but I couldn't stop. I accelerated even more. The engine roared, and the figure fell behind. For a second, I thought I was in the clear. But then the radio started to fail. The music became a mess of noise. It wasn't just static. There were voices there, low, distorted, as if someone was trying to talk to me through the speakers. I switched stations, but it was all the same. That hum, the whispers, it was with me somehow. That's when the car started to lose speed. I looked at the dashboard in despair. The tank was full, the engine was perfect so far, but nothing was working. It was as if someone had pulled the brake without me touching it. Not now, please. I begged, trying to turn the key again and again. And then I saw him. From the reflection in the windscreen, he was there. Not on the road, but next to the car. Too close. His eyes, or lack of them, stared at me. and I felt my skin burn with fear. I wanted to scream, but my throat caught. All I could do was close my eyes. When I finally opened them, he was no longer there. The road was empty again, and the car started up again, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and I knew it wasn't over. When I got home, it was clear that something inside me had changed. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, as if I had crossed an invisible line. After locking the door and double-checking all the windows, I sat on the sofa, trying to calm my breathing. The clock on the wall ticked 3 a.m, but I didn't feel sleep coming on. Every shadow in the room seemed bigger than it should have been, and the slightest sound made me jump. The memory of those eyes, or the lack of them, wouldn't leave my head. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I really wanted to sleep. I decided to distract myself with some whiskey. Not that I'm much of a drinker, but I needed something to take my mind off things. The liquid went down my throat burningly, but it didn't bring the relief I was hoping for. That's when I heard the first sound. It was a faint, almost imperceptible rustling from outside. I looked out of the window and saw nothing. Maybe it was just the wind, I convinced myself. But even so, I couldn't ignore the feeling that it was wrong. It wasn't the kind of sound the wind makes. I picked up the phone and rang my brother Jack. He's always been my safe harbor, the kind of person who knows what to say when things get weird. But that night, all I got was the voicemail recording. Shit, I muttered before hanging up. The rustling sound got louder. Now it sounded like it was coming straight from the front door. With my heart in my mouth, I went to it, praying it was just my imagination. I peered through the peephole and, of course, saw no one. But there was something. On the floor, right in front of the door, was a piece of paper. I opened the door slowly, feeling the cold, early morning air envelop me. I picked it up carefully, not realizing that I was holding my breath. When I finally looked at it, my vision blurred for a second. It was a drawing, hand-drawn with childish and precarious strokes. It showed a human figure with completely black eyes and arms outstretched towards me. Below, in letters almost too elegant for the rest of the drawing, was a phrase, "I am here." My first reaction was to look around, hoping to see who had left it. But there was no one. Just the heavy silence and the biting wind. I closed the door tightly and went back to the sofa, holding the drawing as if it were a bomb about to explode. The strangest thing, the handwriting looked familiar. Not in an obvious way, but something about the way the letters looked bothered me. It was as if I'd seen it before, somewhere, but I couldn't remember where. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the sofa, the drawing in my hand and the bottle of whiskey on the floor. Every minute, the silence seemed deeper, more oppressive. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was as if something was waiting, and I knew, with terrifying clarity, that it wasn't going to stop there. At dawn, the clarity brought a kind of temporary relief. For a moment, I convinced myself that the night before had been nothing more than a nightmare, fueled by exhaustion and whiskey. But the paper was still there, on the table like a scar that was impossible to ignore. I decided to take the drawing to work, not out of courage, but because staying at home seemed unbearable. Deep down, I knew I needed to be surrounded by people, Working in the local library wasn't exactly the busiest of jobs, but at least there was movement, hushed conversations, and the constant company of books. On the way, the feeling of being watched persisted. Every reflection in the shop windows seemed to hide something lurking. A shadow that disappeared as soon as I turned round. I parked the car as close as possible to the entrance and hurried in, trying to pretend to be normal. My colleague, Margaret, was at the counter, sorting through a pile of returns. She had that motherly way that makes you feel safe, even in the midst of chaos. "You look terrible, Neil," she commented, frowning. "I didn't sleep well," I replied, throwing my rucksack on the floor anyway. I thought about telling him what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out. It seemed ridiculous, as if verbalizing it would make it all the more real. Later, while cataloguing some old books, I noticed something strange. Between the pages of a volume on British folklore, I found a folded piece of paper. My heart raced, and my hands began to sweat as I carefully opened it. It was another drawing. This time it showed the same black-eyed figure, but in more detail. The lines were firmer, the strokes more precise. The figure was surrounded by several others, all with the same empty eyes and mouths, open in silent screams. What made me shudder was not the drawing itself, but the phrase written underneath, "You know who we are." I didn't know, or I thought I didn't. The problem was that the message seemed to poke at something in my memory, a sense of déjà vu so intense that it was almost physical. I went straight to the computer and started researching black-eyed figures. I found obscure forums, spooky accounts, but nothing that really fit. Margaret appeared from behind the counter, making me jump in my chair. "Are you all right, Neil? You're whiter than a sheet of paper." "Yeah, just professional curiosity," I lied, closing the browser tab. But she kept staring at me, as if she knew something was wrong. When the day's work was over, I walked to my car with a heavy feeling in my chest. The street was deserted, the cold air cut through my skin, and the street lamps flashed intermittently. I got into the car and slammed the door, trying to block out the feeling that something was following me. On the passenger seat, there was another piece of paper. I hadn't put anything there. I grabbed the paper with trembling hands, and before I even opened it, I knew I didn't want to see what was inside. But I looked, and in that instant, I realized that the shadows in the corners of my vision were not figments of my imagination. They were there, waiting. On the way home, every meter I traveled seemed to stretch time. The city lights had an opaque quality, as if the night was slowly swallowing up the world. The uncovered sheet of paper on the passenger seat rested in my lap, and the thought of reading it again made my stomach turn. When I finally parked, I hesitated before getting out of the car. It was as if the door to my own house was a portal to something I didn't want to face. Nevertheless, I stepped inside. The room was dark and the atmosphere charged, as if someone had just left and left a trail of presence. Without switching on the lights, I headed straight for the kitchen, where a glimmer of normality awaited me in the form of a kettle and a packet of tea. While the water boiled, I took the sheet of paper and reluctantly unfolded it. This time, the drawing was more terrifying. The central figure, the same one with the black, empty eyes, seemed to be getting closer, as if it had broken through the barrier between the paper and the real world. Behind her, The shadows were no longer just static figures. They had faces, deformed, and their eyes seemed to be fixed on me. And, as if that wasn't enough, another message accompanied the drawing. "We're closer than you think." A shiver ran down my spine, and the cup I was holding slipped out of my hands and crashed to the floor. Before I could pull myself together, I heard a sound coming from the corridor. It was a low whisper, but it carried something that sounded more than human. Neil. My name was pronounced like a drag, prolonged, echoing as if from within the walls. Holding my breath, I grabbed a knife from the nearest drawer and crept into the corridor. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, distorted as if they were mocking me. There was no one there, but the sound continued, changing to a chorus of whispers, voices overlapping in different tones. In a desperate impulse, I rang Margaret. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the number right. When she answered, her voice was an anchor in the storm. "Neil, what's wrong?" "I don't know," I stammered, unable to organize the words. "Something's happening to me. I'm not alone here." She tried to calm me down, suggesting I go to her house, but something was stopping me. It was as if leaving the house meant breaking an unspoken rule, one I didn't even know existed. In the middle of the conversation, a loud sound resounded through the house, like wood being scratched by claws. I let go of the phone and turned towards the living room. The shadows were there, but this time they had form, a fluid movement, like smoke coming to life. The courage I thought I had evaporated. I ran into the bedroom and locked the door, feeling my heart hammering in my chest as if it was going to explode. The only light came from the lamp, whose bulb flickered as if it was about to go out. It was then that I saw something impossible. In the mirror on the wall, the shadows weren't just reflected. They were trying to get out. For some inexplicable reason, in the midst of the panic, a terrible clarity came over me. Sitting in the corner of the room with my back pressed against the wall, I knew that running away wasn't an option. Whatever it was, wasn't just here. It was in me. The mirror on the other side of the room pulsed with a sickly glow, as if it were a window to something beyond. The shadows continued to move, more and more sharply defined, their contours hinting at shapes that my brain struggled to process. And then one of them detached itself, dripping down the glass and rising up in the middle of the room, tall and deformed, like a puppet whose master had lost control. "You shouldn't have looked," the thing whispered. Its voice was a mixture of echoes and pops, so unnatural that it sounded like the air itself was breaking. My mouth was dry, and my mind was screaming for an explanation that would never come. "What do you want from me?" My voice came out hoarse, little more than a breath. The creature tilted its head, as if pondering my question. "You already know," it replied, and this time the voice was inside my head. It was then that the truth, or something close to it, hit me. It wasn't about the paper, the drawings, or the whispers. It was about what it represented. A total loss of control. A plunge into darkness that I never wanted to face. I had crossed a threshold, and now I was part of something bigger, something I couldn't understand. The light bulb flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging the room into darkness. There were no screams, no resistance, just absolute silence as the shadow enveloped me, cold and suffocating, like a black wave that swallows everything in its path. When I regained my senses, I was sitting on the park bench, the same one where it all began. The sun was shining and people were walking past as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't real, or at least not entirely real. The world around me seemed blurred, as if I were looking through stained glass. I looked down at my hands and saw that they were stained black, as if I had been holding charcoal. But when I tried to wipe them, the black wouldn't come off. It was part of me now. If this story hooked you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, what do you think really happened to Neil? Share it with anyone who loves a story that mixes mystery and a touch of horror.